outsider when we haven't been able to get here on a Wednesday, but I know people get used to their seats. I don't have a need to make someone seat. What was with the bird last week? I mean, I was, did it,
It finally
and
leave.
she went over there and then she went over
goodies. I said, somebody mentioned that the table was all scratched up and looked awful. And I said, could you cover it up? And she said she would. Now she does it every week. I invited our workers to come in.
Is it open now? I could tell it wasn't even on this side, but I thought everyone would think I was very.
It's not perfect. It was so. But it's a but the second thing that did
Is it there?
leave it alone because it'll make you nuts.
I was gonna do.
Unless we take out a disorder.
I was going to do it.
Everybody knows I'm not OCD.
No problem.
I noticed right away that your tablecloth was there, that it was never been more, that it wasn't put up at all. I was so grateful.
And I thought, oh, this is a new try this.
But yes, absolutely. Hello.
I see you remembered your key fobs. Someone gave it to you last week.
Yes. She said, I didn't think it would be that such a big. Last week, because it was raining so hard, I ran out of the car and I left it in the car. And I thought, okay, well, look. No. I figured, okay, look, they'll cut me a little bit of slack for
My
1 week.
father always had them in all his pockets.
Aha.
No, my father always had it in his pocket.
Boy, it's very chilly today.
Huh? It is chilly in here, right?
Hello. To you brave souls who came even in the rain.
India. She said she sent you some kind of a video, and she said this goes to the other. So there you are.
Okay. Okay, good morning, everyone. So, as you recall, last week we spent talking about Greece, and we got through about the first half of Greek history with regard to the Jews. We got up to basically the end of the medieval period. And so, if you'll recall your world history, what happens is, after we have the Roman Empire, then we have the Byzantine Empire, which is basically Alexander's empire. And then the Byzantine Empire splits into two, and we have the Byzantine Empire continuing in the eastern half, and the Holy Roman Empire happening in the western half. And then, how does the Byzantine Empire end? It's the takeover of the Ottoman Turks. And then it becomes the Ottoman Turk Empire. And when does that happen? Well, the very beginning happens in around 1300. And then the history of the Ottoman Empire in Greece begins around the mid-15th century. So that's the mid-1400s. So it takes the Ottoman Empire a little while to conquer everything and expand out into what was the Holy Roman Empire at that point. And the Ottoman Empire is going to last until 1912 in Greece and 1922 in general. 1912 is the Greek War for Independence, so it frees itself from the Ottoman Empire. Okay. At the time of the Ottoman Empire, almost all the Jews who were living in Greece were living in Thessaloniki, or sometimes you'll hear it now called Salonika. And they were Sephardim, and they were basically exclusive tailors to the Janissaries. And let me write that down. Oh, come on, Mark. And the Janissaries were a private army of the sultans. And so they enjoyed special privileges, and they were employed by the Sultan to protect himself, as well as they expanded out to protect some of the territory. Really, it was the very first, what they say, the very first standing army in Europe. And during this time, as I said, many of the Jews in Thessaloniki worked as tailors for these Janissaries. I mean, there were many, many, many thousands of them, Janissaries. So they needed a lot of clothing. And what ended up happening is the Jews of Thessaloniki were prosperous. They did very well as the tailors. After the expulsion from Spain, of course, there were large numbers of Jews who left and came to Greece. And there were about 15 to 20,000 who came. And Thessaloniki was sort of known as a haven for religious tolerance. So people wanted to go there. Jews were not persecuted there. The Ottoman Jews welcomed them because they improved the economy. They held administrative posts. They established the first printing press. And the city became known as a center for learning and commerce. So you'll recall, as we go through our Jewish history, I like to dabble in world history as well. And so the printing press comes in around the year what? 1500, great. Exactly. So we have to thinking in large, round terms. 1500 is the printing press. In Jewish terms, what is 1500 also? The expulsion from Spain, yes, and then a little bit later from Portugal. Anyone else? What's going on in the 1500s in the Jewish world in what is now Israel? This is the height of the Kabbalah. This is Joseph Caro writing the Shulchan Aruch. This is really the height of the Kabbalah. Nope, 15. So how is it that the Jews improved the economy for the Ottomans? So the Ottoman Empire welcomed the Jews into Greece because the Jews improved the economy. They had administrative skills. They were merchants. They brought in trade. Very good. Good. They brought in trade. And what was very unique about the Jews that helped? Good. Very good. They could speak several languages. But also recall that when in medieval times and afterwards, especially like with the Ottoman Empire, you had Christian Europe and then you had the Muslim world. Christian Europe did not want to deal with the Muslim world. Muslim world did not want to deal with, I shouldn't say that, did not deal directly with the Christian world. The Christian world did not deal directly with the Muslim world because of religious differences. But they wanted to. The Muslim world had many things that the Christian world wanted and vice versa. So the Jews, say that again, Janice? Beautiful. So Janice says the Jews could talk to the Muslims as well as the Christians. And that's correct. Now, how did that happen? It's really interesting because the Jews in Europe were speaking what? Yiddish, German, some of the languages of their countries, but basically Yiddish. The Jews in the Muslim world were speaking Arabic, and they were speaking Ladino. Ladino and Arabic versus Yiddish. So how did that happen? I mean, these are two different, the Jews of Europe couldn't speak to the Jews of the Arab world, could they? Yes, they could. Yes, they could. How? Because they had Hebrew. They both had Hebrew, and they could do numbers. They could keep all the books. They could keep all the records, and they could do it in Hebrew, and both populations could understand it. So the Jews were able to facilitate trade both in the Christian world and in the Muslim world by virtue of the fact that both sets of populations spoke Hebrew and could keep weights and measures and books and everything. So yes, Janice, exactly correct. And the city became known as a center for learning and commerce. Jews were the majority population in Thessaloniki in 1519. They had 56% of the population in 1519. By 1613, they had 68% of the population. So Thessaloniki was a Jewish town, for sure, Jewish city. The Jews did have to pay the jizya tax. Does anyone recall what that is? Good. Tax for non-Muslims for what? Almost. Almost. Good idea. Good thought. It's a good thought. It's a tax. Yes, very good. For not being in the army. Because they were dhimmis. Remember the Jewish status in the Muslim world, the Jewish status, they were called dhimmis. They were second-class citizens, but they were sort of the Sultan's protected peoples. Very nice. So Janice says they had to dress differently to show who they were. They had to make sure that they were not higher than, remember we talked about that? If walking down the street, the Muslim was on the horse, you had to be walking, you couldn't be higher. We couldn't rebuild and or build new synagogues. We could only sort of repair what we had, and none of the synagogues could be higher than the Muslim mosques, et cetera, et cetera. And so we did talk about the idea that, by and large, Jews in the Muslim world had an easier time than Jews in the Christian world. It wasn't great for either, but it was a little easier for Jews in the Muslim world. There were far fewer riots and acts of persecution in the Muslim world than there were in the Christian world. And Gary says, as long as we played the game. Yes, that's right. Yeah. We couldn't hold outdoor celebrations. We just had to kind of like keep it low key, do our thing, not be ostentatious, and basically they left us alone. Yes, everybody had a different kind of dress, Janice says, to show who they were. Yes, yes. I mean, it was very clear we had to identify who we were as Jews, yes. And so one of the burdens on the dhimmis was they had to pay the jizya, the tax for not serving in the military. However, and Gary correctly says they weren't allowed in the military. They couldn't go into the military, and they had to pay a tax for not being able to do something. It just was the way of the world at that time for Jews. The Jews of Thessaloniki enjoyed a relatively good existence at that time. You know, if you're looking at what else is going on in the world, you know, they're in Greece, which is what, the South Central Europe, I guess, sort of. Southeast Europe, Southeast Europe. Spain is not so far away. And Spain, the Jews were not welcomed. Portugal, by this time, the Jews were not welcomed. France had already kicked out. It was a mess. And so they were doing fairly well. By the mid-19th century, the Janissaries, those were the elite troops of the Sultan, had been disbanded. Because what happened was the Janissaries grew into a very corrupt army force, and it became more and more and more hereditary. So families, and the Janissaries were exempt from paying taxes of any kind. So these families grew very rich. There was a lot of nepotism, obviously, and it became a hereditary position, and that, of course, increased the imbalance of wealth between classes, and so by the mid-19th century, the sultans had disbanded them. Could it be that the Janissaries were a threat? Absolutely, it could be that the Janissaries were a threat. I think the Sultan But I think the Sultan saw them more. I think the impetus for their disbanding had more to do with corruption and the role of Islam in society. Look, we all understand here that in our century, for sure, there are fundamentalist Christians. That's true, but they're not warlike. They were, because we had the Crusades, right? And there isn't fundamental Judaism, except for maybe the Samaritans, the Karaites, and maybe some West Bank settlers. And they're not warlike either, except the West Bank settlers are creating some very tense situations. But there are definitely fundamentalist Muslims. We know that. We understand that. It's among all the billions of Muslims in the world, they're a very small minority, the fundamentalists. Fundamentalist means that you adhere solely to your text. That's it, your written text. For Jews, absolutely not. Why? Because what the rabbis say, the interpretations of the rabbis, is far more important than what the text says. We go by what the rabbis say. We don't go by what the text says. We go by what the rabbis say the text says, just like the Supreme Court and the Constitution. Whatever the Supreme Court says the Constitution says, that's what we go by. Same thing with Christianity. They have an interpretive tradition as well. Now, Islam does have an interpretive tradition. The problem is that it's not a homogeneous tradition, meaning that for Jews, the Talmud is a collection of the interpretive traditions. There are modern interpretations based on each movement, for sure, but the largest part of our interpretive texts is the Talmud, period. Christianity has similar works for them. Islam has many different interpretations, and none of them is the one that everybody follows. The big problem in Islam is that you can shop around for imams. You can't shop around for rabbis. Say again? Well, some people do, but it's very, very not okay in Judaism. In other words, let's say you want you want your marriage performed and one rabbi won't do it. And then you keep going around till you find the rabbi who will. Or, there are any number of things for which you could shop around for rabbis. And it's very much discouraged in Judaism. We were told in rabbinical school, watch out for people who are shopping around, because it's not okay, and you shouldn't be part of it. Yes, Susie. Don't people drop out of temples and go to other temples? Sure, that's a different issue. They are, I wouldn't, sometimes. I mean, if you go to a temple and you drop out and you go to another temple because you didn't like the rabbi of the first temple, normally it's not because you didn't like the rabbi because they didn't share your ideals. It's either you didn't like the people in the synagogue, it was too far away from you, or you decided that whatever movement that synagogue belongs to doesn't reflect your idea of who you are as a Jew. And so you go to find another synagogue within a different movement, and then you shop around for the rabbi that you like, not the rabbi who will tell you what you want to hear, but the rabbi you like. As we all know, you go to a synagogue and it's the rabbi's personality that plays a part, certainly a part, in whether you decide you want to be at that synagogue or not. You don't shop around for a decision, exactly. You're shopping around for personality.
I've known people who left synagogues because of the political philosophy, the religious philosophy, or how that synagogue stands in the Jewish movement.
Yes, and Gary says, I've known people who have left synagogues because of the political ideology of the synagogue or the religious ideology of the synagogue, or how that synagogue stands in the movement. Certainly, certainly, certainly. You know, when I took over Valley Beth Israel, we were conservadox. Except for a minyan, we could have been Orthodox. There was no English whatsoever except for the sermon, that was it. And even on Friday nights. And Friday nights, when I remember my first couple of Friday nights there, way back in 2000, mostly older women, elderly women, not one of them could understand or read Hebrew because they hadn't had the opportunity when they were younger. It wasn't allowed. They weren't allowed to go. And I remember thinking, what are we doing here? They're looking at Hebrew words. Maybe they're reading something on the transliteration or the English on the left side, but they're just saying a whole bunch of Hebrew words. They have no idea what it means. This can't be a good thing. Anyway, so when I moved us a little bit more to the middle and then more to the right, I did have 3 or 4 people who left. It's like, okay, this is not okay with us. I said, okay, no problem. Sorry, but not okay. So the Janissaries were destroyed by the mid-19th century, and the commercial routes that the Jews had garnered for the Ottoman Empire were gradually being taken over by European powers. At the time, there were about 25,000 to 30,000 Jews in Thessaloniki. It's a lot. 25 to 30,000. But what it created in this city was a scarcity of resources. There were fires, there were hygiene problems, you know, with the water. And so it was a difficult time in the mid-19th century. So we're talking about 1850s approximately. By the time we get to the late 19th century, eventually, the Jews had established themselves to do trade with the European powers that had encroached on their previous commercial routes. But along with that came Greek and Armenian anti-Semitism to the city. And, you know, the Jews had not really had to deal with that in Thessaloniki before. So it was the beginning of some problems. And part of the sentiment, part of the anti-Jewish sentiment came about because if you think about it, in Thessaloniki at the time, for sure, you had Jews, Muslims, and Christians. You had a lot of Jews, you had some Muslims, and you had Christians. Okay, what is the Muslim time off, day off? Friday. Friday is not actually a Sabbath for Muslims, but what it is Muslims are called to stop work and go to a long period of prayer in the middle of the day. So essentially, they don't work on Fridays. It's not exactly Sabbath, but it kind of sort of works out to be. For Jews, obviously, our day off is Saturdays. For Christians, Sundays. So what happened in Thessaloniki? Everybody worked from Monday to Thursday. And then there were 3 days off. And that caused resentment among various groups of people. And so there were problems. Yes?
When did Greece become majority Christian as opposed to majority Muslim?
When did Greece become majority Christian as opposed to majority Muslim? After the Ottoman Empire ends its rule in Greece. Yes, 1922, actually, just after World War I. So in 1912, the Ottoman Empire in Greece ends. In 1918, we have the end of World War I. How does World War I end? The Ottoman Empire comes to an end. Treaty of Versailles. Very good, very good. So we have the Treaty of Versailles on June 28, 1919. Anyone know what the Treaty of Versailles says or does? Go ahead. I think this is all really important for us. We're seeing what happens to Jews, and then we're understanding, okay, what's going on in the larger sense? How did it happen? So the winning powers put a real heavy burden on Germany in reparations, and Austria-Hungary was dissolved. Okay. They divvied up the Middle East. Very good. So what happens after World War I ends with the Treaty of Versailles. Obviously, from Versailles, France, this is where the treaty was signed. Okay. On the Allies, you had Russia, France, Belgium, Great Britain, Italy, Greece, the United States, as well as some other smaller countries, versus Austria-Hungary, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire. So remember, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was pretty big in Europe, and then you had Germany, and you had the Ottomans, which were very big as well. Okay, what happened in the Treaty of Versailles is that Germany had lost, and the Allies made the Germans not only admit that they had started the war, but it imposed a very heavy burden on them in terms of reparations. You have to pay for all the damage you did. Similarly, the Austro-Hungarian Empire was divided up, and the Ottoman Empire was divvied up as well among a number of different people. This is how we get the British Mandate of Palestine, because Palestine was part of the Ottoman Empire, and it was given to even to Great Britain as their territory. Other countries, France got Syria, and other countries got other parts of the Ottoman Empire. That assignment to the British Mandate came in the San Remo Conference of 1920. And so Britain then became the governing force in Palestine. And so what World War I created, the end of World War I created, was a terrible, terrible time in Germany. They went through what's called hyperinflation. So like a loaf of bread cost 300,000, whatever, Deutschmarks probably at that time. And so economically, Germany was absolutely ruined and humiliated. Basket case. It was the Weimar Republic. Very good. And so this gives us the seeds for Hitler's ascent. Because what did Hitler do? Hitler touted the strong Germanic Nordic heritage, that they were people related to the gods, that they were strong, and that they would rise again, and blah, blah, blah. And so these are people who had been humiliated and decimated financially, and they wanted to feel good about themselves again. So we understand why they might have embraced a leader who kept telling them that he is going to do such great things for the German people and for Germany. Okay. So the Ottoman rules the Ottoman rule ends in 1912. That creates a little bit of a problem for the Jews of Thessaloniki, because the Jews were accused, for a time anyway, of cooperating with the Turks, the Ottomans, during the war. So they saw them as traitors. Eventually, that feeling subsided, and things were much better for the Jewish population. And Greece accepted the Balfour Declaration in 1917. So tell me about the Balfour Declaration.
The Jews were given permission, or their right to a homeland was acknowledged by the British.
Okay, very good, very good. So in 1917, Lord Balfour supported the idea of a Jewish homeland. And there were a number of countries that didn't want to have anything to do with that. And our situation in the U.S. was complicated at the time. But Greece did support the Balfour Declaration. So that's really good. In 1934, there were many Jews of Thessaloniki who made Aliyah to Palestine, both to Tel Aviv and Haifa specifically. That's where they lived mostly. And then, of course, we have World War II. And Greece is conquered by the Nazis in 1941. Jews fought in the Greek army. And sorry, there was one note that I had. What had happened earlier, I don't remember. Okay. Jews fought in the Greek army, and during the war, 60 to 70, I'm sorry, hang on. This is important. Hello? Yes. Yes. Is there a way that I can talk to him at some point? It's not urgent. Yes. Yes. Okay. What day is that? Okay, at what time? 8:30 would be fine on the 12th. Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm back. Yes. Okay, yes, that's what I need to talk to him about. Okay, thank you. Sorry, that was from the doctor, and you know how hard it is to get a hold of them. Okay, after during the war, 60 to 70,000 Jews of Greece were murdered. That's 81% of the entire Jewish population of Greece. It's horrible. Now, the good news is that some Greeks hid Jews. And this especially happened in the city of Athens. There was a smaller population of Jews in Athens. Thessaloniki still had the largest, but there were a smaller population in Athens. And there were some Greeks who hid Jews. There were at least 1,200 Jews who were given false identity cards to try to save them. And this happened in Athens. However, on July 11th, 1942, the Jews of Thessaloniki were rounded up And the city paid a ransom for them. Obviously, the city gave the Nazis a lot of money, and they let them go. However, still, there were 50,000 who were sent to Auschwitz. Most of the synagogues were destroyed, most of the schools were destroyed, and in the end, only 1,950 survived. And they're almost all gone now too, yeah. After the war, there were many Greek Jews who migrated to Israel. In 1949, Jews of military age, this is what I was looking for. In 1949, Jews of military age could leave for Israel, but what the Greek government told them was they had to renounce their Greek nationality, they had to never return, and they had to take their families with them.
Did you mention the massacre of the Greeks of Rhodes?
Gary asked me if I mentioned the massacre of the Greeks of Rhodes. No, tell me about that, Gary.
Well, there was a large Jewish community in Rhodes.
What year are we talking about?
We're talking 1940,
1940, 41, there was a large Jewish community in Rhodes, and there was a Jewish quarter. Many of them were involved in as merchants, and a lot of synagogues. They were rounded up and sent to the concentration camps. And almost no Jews left there. Yeah, as we're going to find out. Janice says there's a very important book called I Remember Rhodes that talks about that community. It's in English and Ladino. Thank you.
There's a synagogue in Los Angeles, I think in the Ladera Heights area, that was constituted by people who came from Rhodes.
There was a synagogue in the, where area?
I think it was in Ladera.
Ladera Heights that was mostly made up of people who had come from Rhodes. Oh, that's very interesting. I got to look into that a little bit. So I think what ended up happening is that the Greek government probably was a little turned off by so many Jews wanting to leave after they had tried so hard to protect them or do what they could to be friendly to them after they had had this long relationship. And so when these Jews wanted to leave, the Greeks said, fine, go, but you can't come back. Take your families with you. You'll be Israelis now, you won't be Greeks. However, Greece was the first country to return possessions to the Jewish communities that had been confiscated by the Nazis. So now, in Athens and Thessaloniki, in 2015, this is going to change a little bit, but in 2015 there were 6,000 Jews, mostly in Athens. Of them, 1,000 Jews were in Thessaloniki, and they have been integrated into all aspects of society and work. The Jews of Greece had never really experienced anti-Semitism until the Nazis invaded. And so for them, when the threat of deportation came up, it wasn't taken so seriously. And we saw that before where? In Germany, absolutely in Germany. German Jews said, we're Germans. We are German Jews. We're not Jewish Germans. We're German Jews, and we've been here forever. So look, life is hard right now, but they're not going to make it much worse. And by the time Kristallnacht came, it was too late. Then they realized that they were completely wrong about this, But by then, all the routes out of Germany were closed, so there was no way for them to get out.
There's a mic on this chair.
I read somewhere in a book that Greeks were not willing to give up their Jews, and Nazis had sent a special convoy to Greece to round them up and do all that work for them, unlike some other countries which were willing to do it themselves.
Thank you, thank you. So the deportation, the threat. I don't know what I've done here, but okay. The threat of deportation wasn't taken as seriously as it should have been. However, in 2003, on January 27th, Greece named January 27th Holocaust Remembrance Day in Greece. In 2010, the Jewish Museum was defaced. So we have some small anti-Semitic acts. Jewish Museum was defaced in 2012 on the Isle of Rhodes. There were swastikas that were spray painted on one of the Holocaust memorials. But in general, Greece enjoys good relations with Israel today. In recent years, Greek returned citizenship back to the Holocaust survivors, because remember, we had just talked about that. They said, if you go to Israel, you got to give up your citizenship, take your families, basically we don't want to hear from you again. And so Greece re-extended citizenship to Holocaust survivors who had been asked to leave, or who wanted to leave to go to Israel. That I could find that there is the Monastir Synagogue in Thessaloniki, there is the Beth Shalom Synagogue in Athens, and there is the Eitz Chaim Synagogue in, Hanina. No, yes. So what we know today is that there are 1,000 Jews left, and there are a few places, Corfu, Trikala, Larissa, Volos, Chalkis, and the Rhodes, and in Crete. Each one of those has about 100 Jews in their population. And so really Jewish history in Greece is the beginning, starting in the beginning, where a very, very vibrant Jewish Sephardic population, beginning, remember, with Jews from the Roman Empire, the Romaniotes, and then after the expulsion from Spain, large waves of Sephardim come to Greece. And almost everything, as Gary pointed out earlier, was wiped out during the Holocaust. And now that incredibly rich tradition has mostly disappeared. Did the Depression hit Europe? Yes, absolutely. Yes. So you mean the Depression for us absolutely had reverberations worldwide. No question about it. It's one of Hitler's talking points. Expand on that.
Well, he blamed the situation in Germany on the defeat of World War I and the economic situation.
He blamed the defeat of Germany after World War I on the United States economic situation. And the economic problems in Germany were clearly a result of the Treaty of Versailles. But to scapegoat and put the put the cause on somebody else is a very common tact of dictators and.
Part of what Joel said was he also directly blamed the Jews for the
Yes, and Gary said, and part of what he also said is he directly blamed the Jews for the economic problems, and that was correct. Okay, so now we know a little more about the Jews of Greece. Before I leave today, it's going to be Warren's birthday on Friday, Wednesday. Oh, next Wednesday. Next Wednesday. And since we're not going to be here, I want to do a blessing for him. So that's wonderful.
You're the birthday boy.
So let's sing happy birthday to Warren. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Warren. Happy birthday to you. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Get a blessing.
Now you get a blessing. Please.
Come on, Lauren.
The Lord bless you and protect you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace and health and happiness and many more years with us. And we say,
I'd like to remind everybody that we'll be gone 2 weeks for the Passover break, and Susie and I want to wish you a happy Passover.
yes.
So Rabbi,
Wonderful and sweet Passover, everyone.
so we'll see Rabbi in a couple of weeks. We'll see everybody in a couple of weeks. You'll see me in a couple.
AJU had a presentation on the assimilation of the Jews in the United States. There's this professor, I don't remember his name, at Harvard, who wrote a book on this assimilation process, and he argued very strongly that the big
You have to leave.
the rest of us, this was amazing. I don't know.
What did you want to say?
Oh, it surprised me.
I think those who would deny that are fighting a war that they can't win, that they're just losing and they don't realize they're losing.
That's exactly what he said.
So you embrace it and you try to do whatever you can to foster
Mine too, and my ankles are bad. Yeah, we switched
within that
medications.
dynamic. Yeah, I agree. Yep. All right, everybody.
Have a good one.
Online.
Oh, okay. Thank you, thank you.
So did you talk to her?
Yes, I talked to her, he was on, and he was gonna try again.
Huh?
Yeah, I called him.
And he's on?
I don't know if he came back on, but he had left the chat from earlier, so I said, go off, come back. Working on it.
I don't think Joan ever got her chat working right. I think it still comes up you or me or. That's crazy. How could it? I don't understand that. Your hair looks very nice. I see. Mine too.
Well, on Wednesdays when I'm here, I finally got it. I made a special trip. Because it's around the corner from here.
Yeah.
And I made
We were supposed to set something up for
We're
you.
supposed to have a screen here.
All right,
Because
so
if
check
not,
with,
I'm gonna
um,
be
check with
dictating to you all
Patrick.
day. This is not happening.
Check with Patrick, I'm sure he can.
Okay.
So Rabbi, this is great.
No screen. Wait, Rosalie?
What?
Just spilled their coffee over there.
Where?
Okay, so we're in the bathroom break between the two classes. I looked up about the gardeners and salad Road, and Rico did not. You had asked them. So I didn't want to forget to tell you. No, I got a text. Not a text. I got like a notification for the drop-down screen, that, where it lights up with it. You get those the little numbers you get in my medical app, that Kevin switched my taxi to Wednesday afternoon.
So anyway, I need to tell, we're going to be delayed a few minutes because Rabbi is making copies of her PowerPoint presentation.
3 o'clock Wednesday. So that's good, because if somehow we, if I have to skip the class because I'm too tired or whatever, I can always see it online.
Oh, I know that. So Rabbi went to the office.
Third, and the other thing was moved to the 4th, and so if she really, so if she really comes out to Oakland and we want to make the trip up there, we can. And if she doesn't come because she has a lot of medical problems, then okay, so it didn't matter. No, I never left a message because she has narcolepsy. She's asleep half the day. So I'll leave her a text, but to say to her, are you still thinking of coming in 3 months is a little ridiculous because it's too far away from when she's going to be able to do it. But that was, there was a reason it was going to be those days. I don't remember the reason. Including that she set up a medical appointment, specialized consultation in the Bay Area, and that's why she was going. Anyway, let me go now. Okay, bye.
She's gonna make copies. Meanwhile, I will start and everybody can listen, but she's gonna make copies Thursday.
Oh, our son took his 2 kids to Disneyland yesterday.
Oh, great.
He's got an annual pass.
Oh, he does? That's so lucky.
Well, I don't know if it's lucky. Huh?
Hi, Rena. I'm so glad you're here in person.
And now it went up.
I do. I live in
What can I say?
Oh, you do? I'm not off my balance.
I wish you.
So he pointed out to me, because they don't have the shul there anymore, but they still have the bulletin that we can tribute to. And they are on the trail. I was listening to the class and but you remember you mentioned yes. And you said that Ellen was my Monterey partner to these classes, which you and I mentioned that they needed that program.
No kidding.
Yeah. So.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Boker or, well, I just really completely regret, and I would like to go bury myself in a hole, that every time we try to get together, there's some kind of technology glitch. So for those of you at home, hello. We went back to live stream, and now we're here in person. If it's possible for you to come in person and you're at home, please join and in here. In a few moments, God willing, you'll be receiving my PowerPoint in the class on paper so that you will have the packet of the PowerPoint that we're doing today. So let me start by inviting you to participate in the Blessing for Learning, and then I'm going to explain how we are. I hope you were supposed to wear your boots because we're going sledging through Gold Rush territory today. So, but I want to explain that. But first, let's do the Blessing for Learning. Everybody, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu B'mitzvotav Vitzivanu La'asok B'divrei Torah. hopefully not too much more soaking, except for in learning Torah. So let me tell you, the PowerPoints that you are getting are things that are excerpted from a number of different books, magazines, articles that I put together in order for us to learn kind of firsthand what was happening for people when they went into gold rush country. So most of the things that we have on these PowerPoints, and our PowerPoint use is going to last a couple of sessions. So I'd like to ask you from the bottom of my heart to please not go and read everything that's going to be provided for you on the paper before we go to class, or else if you do, don't bother coming because these things were meant to be read by people in the class, which we'll have you do today, but also to be looked at in their time. So you're now going to be in possession of my precious PowerPoint work, so guard it carefully.
Teacher's telling us not to do
Homework. Please do not do homework. So now we're going to get started, and hopefully in just a few minutes, Deborah Peterkovsky, who works with us in our office, will bring these stapled together beautiful packets. So the first one that I'd like to share with you and is about anti-Semitism by authors writing about the gold rush in California. This doesn't happen in all the texts that we are going to be looking at, but it's really important to see that when Jews got up into the gold rush country, which put them in contact with a number of people who were not even living in Wild West towns, but in these places that were created in muddy places wherever wherever they could find the gold or pan for the gold. These towns were even more rough and ready than early San Francisco or Los Angeles were. So here, this is quote, "Mining, the cultivation of the soil, in a word, any occupation that requires exposure to the weather, is too fatiguing and intolerable for them." Who's the them? "The law requiring man to get bread by the sweat of his brow is an injunction with which they refuse to comply." And another text, "In traveling through the mines from one end to the other, I never saw a Jew lift a pick or shovel to do a single stroke of work, or in fact occupy himself in any other way than in selling slops. And in a country where no man, to whatever class of society he belonged, was in the least degree ashamed to roll up his sleeves and dig in the mines for gold, or to engage in any other kind of manual labor, it was a very remarkable fact that the Jews were the only people among whom this was not very observable."
Where was this published?
I'll have to look for exactly where it was published. I think newspaper. Yes. These were letters written into newspapers for the most part. I'm not sure if where this one was located. Some of the PowerPoints have that. So here's the thing. The thing is that just simply wasn't true. So I'm trying to, hold on. Now my PowerPoints are not doing anything. Oh, there we go. That simply wasn't true. There were lots and lots of Jewish men who came up and absolutely panned for gold in all of these different places. So basically, this was an anti-Semitic trope that was being promulgated by certain people who probably were jealous because many Jews also did what?
Made money.
Yeah, made money with the stores that they created up in these gold rush, little tiny gold rush towns. So, of course, if you have 20 miners out there in a load working, if there were one Jew, that would be a lot, because nobody who's writing these things is taking into consideration that their Jews are a minority, a great minority in the area. However, there is documentation of numbers of people who actually were involved in mining. Now, what we will see is that many people who were involved in mining and just didn't hit it, which is most everybody, by the way, they would go and find something else to do. And the question for that is, why would they go and find something else to do when the other people who were miners who had come, if they didn't hit it, they went home? Gary.
So there were many Jewish merchants who supplied the miners, and they did very well at that.
Yep, and we're gonna see some more of that in the paper PowerPoints.
Answer your question is the Jewish men did what they had learned in their lives. You do what, you get something going and you do it. And if you need to get a store going, that's what you do. Many of these other men didn't know anything but farming or something, so it never occurred to them to move into that kind of position.
That's true.
I did not hear her, and I'm sitting.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Say it one more time. I have to be like one of those guys in the old-fashioned TV talk shows.
Right. Okay.
I forgot about
so
that.
To your mouth.
What I said was that the Jewish men had storekeeping, or whatever, in their history. They knew something that they could do besides mining, so that's what they went and did. And the men who were mining might have had no other history except perhaps farming, so they just gave up and left.
Okay, so, Jim.
I was going to say that home for them probably was Germany or Poland. So how could they go home? They couldn't go to Denver or Chicago or Omaha. They were stuck.
So, Yasher Koach to both of you. Clearly, one of the reasons is exactly what Jim just said. Home, for other miners, meant something where they could relatively easily go overland or whatever to get back to Kansas or Ohio or wherever they might be from. These Jews had left home for good. So basically, they were stuck. If you couldn't make it mining, you had to try and make it some other way. Thank you for the input, Susie. Thank you for the reminder about the mic. And now let me go on to tell you the flip side of the Jewish miner story. This comes, thank you, Joette, this comes from the Columbia Citizen, and it was written on August 4th, 1866. Article in the paper, okay? A miner who panned gold in downtown Columbia, which was a boomtown mining location in the Sierra foothills in 1866. What is the headline? Good dirt. On a vacant lot, quote, on a vacant lot on State Street, immediately opposite the Citizen office, a Mr. A. Levy, definitely an M-O-T, a member of the tribe, washed out 18 pans of dirt on Thursday last and obtained $6.50 in gold, being an average of a fraction over 36 cents to the pan. A few acres of dirt such as this and a good hydraulic ought to be sufficient to satisfy any reasonable man. And Mr. Levy said, there's lots of it lying around loose. So not only do we have an article in the Citizen about a new find on a vacant lot, what do we have from Mr. Levy?
An invitation to others.
An invitation to others. Come. There's plenty of stuff going on. So this was not a person who said, I'm gonna stake my claim, I'm gonna make sure nobody comes to it. So completely diametrically different than the last set of articles that we read. We have here something that actually was published in the paper that basically says, Any comments on this one? Are we good? Okay. Now we're going to get to another proof of a Jew being involved with actually searching for gold. But it's a little different than the one we just read with Mr. Levy. Are you okay? A Jew named Haman, not that guy, Heyman, and several others have held and worked for some weeks some claims on the new lead. These claims were jumped by a man named Moore and some others. So what does that mean? Mr. Hyman, I guess we'll call him, and some other people that he worked together with found a new claim. They staked a claim for looking for gold, and the claim was jumped. So what does that mean? Everybody is saying somebody took it, right? So somebody comes and says, heck no, I'm not paying attention to the fact that you guys already found this. We're going to butt in on it. Man named Moore. A suit brought for the recovery of the claims was decided on Friday last, and a writ of restitution issued. So who won the case? Mr. Hyman and his colleagues. Good? Hyman and his party were put in possession of his claims by Constable Humiston. So you can tell, I mean, this is a real article in the paper. Who the heck Constable Humiston was, I don't know, but probably everybody in the area knew who Constable Humiston was, and it is a warning. Don't jump people's claims, because it ain't gonna work. You're going to end up responsible. On the same day, Moore and others went to the claims, knocked down Haman, so the guy who just lost the case went and physically harmed Mr. Haman, considerably bruising him on the face and breast, and again took possession. So I think I haven't finished it, but I think one of the things we need to recognize, because we talked about this with regard to San Francisco and Los Angeles, these were rough places. But when you get up to Gold Rush country, it's even rougher. And the reason that it's even more rough is because you have people, let's talk about what you had to do to get up there. What did you have to do to get up to Gold Rush country? You had to go by wagon, you had to travel across the country, then you get where you're going. If you were lucky in your hometown, you bought the mule or the ass or whatever it is, the animal that you were going to bring along. You bought your saddles, you bought your pans, you bought all of that stuff. Where you live, you got a better price at it. Because it's not because Jews were selling this stuff. It's because if you live in Grass Valley, which is where this riot happened, if you live in Grass Valley, it's a brand new place with nothing there. So if there comes a company that's selling animals to go to to pan for gold or to look in the mines and pans and equipment and all of that, it's not so easy to come by, so it's going to be more expensive. We are all going through that right now, right, with our economy. So you have to spend a lot of money before you can even go there to try and look for gold.
So, is there evidence that the man who lost this lawsuit was anti-Semitic, or was he just greedy for the land?
There's no evidence in this text that he did it because Mr. Hyman was a Jew. None. However, we had our first text. In our first text, it says, no Jews are doing this, right? No Jews are out there in the mines. No Jews are panning for anything. No Jews are staking claims and actually working with their hands. They're all lazy and only out to make money. So these two following texts are not necessarily directly about anti-Semitism, but they are a proof text that it just wasn't the case. So not only do you have, yes.
I just want to remind us that it was what anti-Semites said about Jews for centuries, when they were not allowed to work the land, that they don't want to get dirty, and they are finding other occupation.
Thank you. We all know that those things, those continue from generation to generation. But the thing is that until you get this mixture of people up in gold rush country, or until more people started influxing to Los Angeles, for example, as we talked about, there was a lot of equality, a lot of cooperation. Particularly, we saw that in the new town of San Francisco. So we're not done here. So a new writ of restitution was issued, and this time was placed in the hands of the sheriff on Wednesday last, it says. And the sheriff put Haman's party again in possession, and Moore was arrested on a charge of riot. So one of the things we're seeing in this text, you're happy to be, Gary, happy to be in Gold Rush country now? One of the things we're seeing in this text is, at least what we're seeing here, is that the authorities were not biased against a Jew who was leading a particular party of people. So the law did the right thing. And that's not always the case anywhere. So what we're seeing in these towns so far is that they got an opportunity to be treated properly by authorities even while things were happening. Aha! Now I want you to raise your hand and say, I will not go beyond beyond what we are on. Amen.
I may have to make, so I made 15.
Great.
And it's Hebrew style because
Okay, thank you. We say thank you so much to Deborah. Okay, will somebody help to pass these out?
let me see if I need to get more.
People can share. We are going to be on reading D.
And it's Hebrew style, so go from the left.
Reading D, folks. Yeah, don't. I'm going to be mortified if we go past where we are. Okay.
Should I make more, or are we good?
I don't know. Do we have enough for today? I think that Susie needs one back there.
I could go make a few more.
Thank you.
Yes? No?
Okay, thank you. A few more.
A few more. Okay, I'll make like 5 more.
All right. Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much. Reading D. Who would be, this is what I wanted to do in the first place. Who is willing to read Reading D? Thank you. Read the whole thing. Oh, at the mic. Hold on a second. At the mic. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know where it is, but. Oh, good. Okay.
Jews in the Gold Rush, reading D. The Gold Rush Merchants, Proclamation of Simon Prager the Peddler. Know, all the fair ladies of this good city of Nevada, that I am able and willing to sell cheaper and fancy goods than any storekeeper, all their self-praise and blowing notwithstanding, and I will prove it with the following reasons. First, I do not pay any store rent, and I need not put a percentage on my goods, which you, fair ladies, have to pay. Second, I dress according to my business, and therefore do not make you pay for expensive clothes. Third, I receive every week a fresh assortment from my brother. I'll always try to sell as cheap as I can, although I never use those honeyed words to bribe you, fair ladies, in the belief that dear is cheap and cheap is dear.
Okay, so stay with this, folks. This is the first text that we have of the Gold Rush merchants. And this was published in the Nevada City, Nevada Journal in 1853. You see that at the bottom. So it's called, the article or the ad is called Proclamation of Simon Prager the Peddler. And they spell peddler wrong, right? So don't go anywhere. Stay on reading D. What do you know about Simon, who now has a little store? He owns the place.
And he gets things weekly, he restocks it, and he's not out, he doesn't want to cheat the people because he dresses the way they do.
Okay, he restocks weekly, and he doesn't want to cheat the people. He's portraying himself as a simple guy. However, the first headline also tells you something. What does it tell you? Besides Jews in the Gold Rush, Proclamation of Simon Prager the Peddler. So what is, Simon just opened the store. What was he before? A peddler. So we need to know that just like in Eastern Europe, folks, many, many, many Jews did not have brick and mortar stores. They put things on their back. They took their own cart that they had to pay for, their own mule that they had to pay for, or horse or whatever they had, and they went from Gold Rush Town to Gold Rush Town to Gold Rush Town. When they got lucky, they would get to do what Simon the Peddler got to do, which is open a little place and stay in one place. Yes, go ahead.
I wanted to say, if you've seen movies, Oklahoma, the peddler, it was in Oklahoma. They went all over where there was a new territory, a new state, so people were doing this, not only the Jews.
Okay, so the peddlers went everywhere. Pass the mic.
Yeah, so my grandfather was a peddler.
1 second. We'll get to everybody.
My grandfather was a peddler in Cleveland, Ohio. And what he did was he would go to May Company and he would buy towels, sheets, whatever. And he would go to the community, the black community, and he would sell them these on time. So every week he'd go collect his couple dollars from each person he sold to.
So he took it to them.
He took it to them, and that's how he made a living. Yeah.
Thank you. Passing it on, we have a number of comments right now, and you need to stay on letter
D. So I lived in a small place in.
Put the
I
mic.
lived in a small place in western New York, and that's how it existed also. The peddlers stopped there and built their stores. And when we moved there in 1971, their families were still there.
Yeah, their families were still there in the same
running the
place.
stores. It could have been electric store, it could have been shoes, it could have been fabrics, all sorts of stores that had been started by peddler Jews.
There you go. I've got one over here, then I'll get it to you over there. I'm sorry, people at home. We hear your comments in our hearts.
I just wonder if he wasn't this Mr. Prager wasn't a peddler still. If there is no saying that he has a store, it's he just says that he doesn't have to pay any rent, which can be that he owns it or that he doesn't.
That he's still a peddler.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that question. I think the reason I said that is because where I excerpted it from, it was indicative that he had a little store. But I might be wrong.
It's not that important, but
Loud.
I remember the peddlers in our neighborhood in Chicago, and they would go through the alley, and people.
The peddlers would go through the alley.
This was in Chicago, and they not only did they sell their wares and people came out and bought them, but sometimes they'd come by with a pony. And then you could run out with the kids, and the kids could take a picture on
A
the pony.
pony. Oh, I remember those. Okay, folks, you now, yes, tell me and I'll put it on the mic because we have to move on.
I had an Aunt Becky who did dry goods, who went into people's homes for sheets and towels and what do you need? I will get them for you. She go to the Lower East Side, get what they needed, and deliver.
So you had, no, I'm going to repeat it. So you had a cousin, aunt, your Aunt Becky, who did dry goods, and she went to people's homes and found out what they needed and got the goods for them.
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to go on now, folks. I know you can't wait.
If you want, people can send through chat questions to Susie.
Oh, if you have questions from home, you can send it through chat to Susie, and then we'll try to get the questions up there, and Susie will speak to that. Okay, danger to peddlers. Now, we're still with the people on the way, so maybe I was wrong about his little store, but I thank you very much we're going to move on. Danger to peddlers. You want to read? Thank you.
I have a loud voice. Can everybody hear me?
No, I have to get you a mic. Here we go. Loud, loud, loud.
Yes.
Aye.
Danger to peddlers, robbery. As a Mr. Jacobson, a peddler, was on his way from Grass Valley to Nevada City at about 5 o'clock on Sunday morning last, he was accosted about a mile this side of the former place by two robbers with masks on, who compelled him to surrender $308 in money and his pack worth about as much more. The villains then tied him to a tree and threatened him with death should he endeavor to escape or hail the Marysville stage, which was shortly expected to pass.
Okay, so I'll say this for a while. What do we learn from this about this particular peddler or peddlers in general? By the way, Nevada City was probably amongst one of the best established of the gold rush towns. But nonetheless, this was happening on the way even to some of those established towns. So has anybody ever been to Grass Valley or Nevada City? So Susie has. I mean, it's if you ever get an opportunity or you want to take a road trip to up heading toward the Sierras, it's a fabulous, fabulous trip to take, because those towns still have a lot of left over from the period of time in which these things were written. It's just so fascinating. But in addition to that, I think I mentioned this near the beginning of our class, there are Jewish cemeteries in all of these major places. There's one in Grass Valley, there's one in Nevada City. There are numerous cemeteries where you can go, and I think I told you that as a teenager in USY, we went to clean those cemeteries up in the Gold Rush country. So they're still maintained. There's a book out that I will bring to show you that you can get that'll tell you about all of those places. And I think I told you that we saw tombstones that said Joe Cohen died with his boots on, you know, just people who, just what you would imagine. So what happens? Here is this peddler. So what kind of life is he living on a day-to-day basis? He had all this taken. I'll repeat what you say. Very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. Even though this is an oft-used road. He's already out and about trying to get on his way from Grass Valley to Nevada City as a peddler, and he's already encountering that kind of danger. What about the money that he loses? $308, it's a ton of money. But one of the things that we need to be aware of when we're dealing with Gold Rush is that everything was inflated. Everything was inflated. So if you wanted to buy an egg, something that in a city somewhere would cost a penny might cost close to $1 in those Gold Rush towns. Because, same reason, right? It's hard to get all of these things. Very much scarcity. So things were really expensive, so everything was jacked up, which means that the peddler selling things has more money than they generally would. But they tied him to a tree, threatened him with death, and said, don't even try to get on the next stage. Why? He would what? He might catch up with them, or he'd be able to convey what happened to people who were speeding from one place to the other, and they might have gotten caught. So this is a real article about what happened. Does it say anything negative about poor Mr. Jacobson? No anti-Semitism in this at all. Just a sense that this is what happened to this guy. Isn't it, for those of you who have the paper, there's a picture of a pretty tall peddler with two big boxes that he's schlepping. And this was a Jewish guy. I don't know his name, but I found his picture, so I put it in there. Everybody okay? Do you like these? All right, so let's go on. Oops, I just went back to A. I got to go up here. Now we're on reading F. Good? Now we're going to see an anti-Semitic article with regard to these store owners and peddlers. Would somebody read that?
Stand up, easier. Jews in the Gold Rush. Jews have built large numbers of small, swindling shops in the broad bed of the Arroyo, as the ground was unoccupied and being miners' property belongs to everyone. The Jews receive very little sympathy from the community for as their hand is against all men's pockets, Their misfortunes only excite the mockery and risible faculties of the crowd. I do not know what we are coming to. What with peaceable citizens, Picayunish Yankees, Jew clothing shops, and down east strong-minded women, Sonora will soon be unbearable, and all the old settlers will have to move off and seek more congenial shades.
Read the bottom line.
Written by a competitor of Jewish merchants in Sonora, William Perkins, who wrote 3 Years in California. I guess he wrote a book?
Yes, he wrote a book. Okay, so William Perkins was well known, and he's well known by historians because he decided to take it upon himself to diss the Jews who were there, but not just the Jews. Who else do you see? Yankees, women, and people from the East and strong-minded women. So what he's saying is all of us, the real people who live here, we need to leave because our little Sonora is getting ruined. And he was very angry, and his angriness carried through a number of different articles. They published some of the articles, but one of the things that happened is the newspapers started to do a disclaimer. This article is, again, written by William Perkins. So people started to get the idea that he had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. So what does he say? Let me just point out. He says that the miner's property belongs to everyone. In other words, we are all here, share and share alike. Do we already know that to be true or to be false? It was so false. So he's trying to paint a picture of all the people who are here, who are supposed to live here. We all get along. We all support each other. I have a wonderful store that is very supportive of everybody else, and it's those Jews who are charging you too much money. So that what he created as his ideal Sonora was not really what was happening in Sonora. Just a really annoying guy. Picayunish means people who just want things exactly their way, just so. And so Yankees, who were Yankees? East Coast people. East Coast people. They came out here thinking they were looking for gold. They came out here thinking that they were going to do this. This is not about Jews, by the way. It's about non-Jews coming from the East. But then they just want everything the way they want it. There were articles that were written not by this guy. I don't think I included them, but forgive me if I did. But there were articles where people were complaining that people had opened up bookstores.
Oh my goodness, bookstores?
Because those were people who were trying to help support and advance the Yankees. So we can see that it was very difficult for people, and it is difficult for people when they have a place that they've lived where everything goes the way they want, and then suddenly it changes. But, you know, that was part of what happened during the gold rush. Places grew and grew and grew and became incredibly populated, and now nobody lives in them anymore. But, you know, they just retain their historical value, because that's what happens. Everybody okay? I love these articles. I don't know if you like them, but I really like them. It's so fun. It's so fun to step back in time and to actually hear what people had to say. So forgive me if I'm really in love with this stuff. I want you people at home are not going to be able to see this right now. I'm sure that Susie will send you a copy. I'll send Susie the material and she'll send everybody a copy of it. But for those of you who are here, this is what Sonora looked like in January 1853 on your next page. So we'll describe it to you at home. It is actually, it's not a huge town, but you can see a number of larger buildings there along with farms and areas because Sonora was being developed. So if you're looking at it, if you look to your right on the picture, you'll see a number of more than one-story buildings right there on the right middle of your document. Do you see that? That's where they created their downtown district. Does everybody see it? So you can see, and you can see things that are being built further out because this is how the development of that area occurred. Everybody okay? Yep, there's a church. If there were a shul here, which there was, but I'm not sure yet in Sonora, if there were a shul, you wouldn't be able to see it from the outside because we don't have one of those steeples on it. So are we okay? I don't have the slightest idea what time it is. Okay, we're going to go on a little bit, right? When am I supposed to be done? Okay, reading G. Reading G. Who would like to read reading G? Joette? Hold on.
Jews in the Gold Rush, anti-Semitism was openly expressed. Quote, during the summer and fall of 1849, Jewish peddlers frequently came into the foothills with merchandise to sell to the Americans and the Indians. Their goods were usually strapped across their backs, while the necessary provisions were carried on mules.
We talked about this. Go on.
These peddlers, like most of their countrymen, were expert tradesmen. Reaching a settlement, they would pitch their camp and immediately set out a tempting display of their wares, consisting, as a rule, of gaudy colored shirts, socks, cheap jewelry, and similar articles. A blue or red shirt would sell for at least half an ounce of gold dust, and the Jewish trader would invariably get the better part of the bargain, as the settlers had no means of weighing their gold. The peddler would put the desired article of purchase in one side of his scale and insist upon the buyers pouring sufficient gold dust into the other side to balance the goods. But while the Americans were invariably cheated in all these transactions, it was the poor ignorant Indians who suffered the worst in their dealings with those rascally traffickers. Doubtless, my readers can readily understand how so many of these self-same Jews afterward became wealthy and prominent merchants in various California towns.
Guess who wrote this? Ah, yes. This is part of his, the quote from his book is about the way that Jews, the peddlers, Jews, did this to other people. Question. What do you think that the other shop holders did? Just what they saw the Jewish merchants doing. Well, we don't know who learned what from whom. However, when I took a look at some other texts to prepare for doing this class, it became clear that this was a way that people sold things when they went out into the vast recesses of where people were. It's pretty It's pretty tricky because a shirt, even one of those, you know, those flannel-y type of shirts that people would wear, that doesn't weigh nothing. So you have to pay quite a lot of gold dust to get your shirt. So if you're just reading it from Perkins' perspective and you think that it's only the Jews who are doing this, then yeah, you're going to be pretty angry about it. However, this seems to be pervasive in the area. Yes.
I think the very telling thing about his
Loud.
the very telling thing about the author's anti-Semitism is that he says Americans and Jews as if Jews were not Americans.
Right. I think in this particular text, he's not saying, yeah, Jews are to sell to the Americans. So just so that you know, that's how they differentiated things. Jews sold to the Americans and to the Indians. Americans were all the white folks from wherever they came from, and then they would specify if people were Indians. So
It's surprising to me that, given what he wrote in the last excerpt we read from him, that he's so magnanimous towards the Indians, because everybody else who was not like him was put down. And yet here he's saying, oh, these poor Indians.
So he wrote things, and by the way, he doesn't really like the Americans all that much either, because the Americans are not the people that he would talk about in Sonora being like native to the area. For many people, I don't know whether this was he, but for many people, they would refer to Americans as the people who came for the gold rush, right? But he may be including all of the white people who are natives. But he does not say anything about the people who were the Mexicanos, which we also have very, very much in that area. He doesn't mention them at all. There were a lot of problems between Americans who came in and Mexicans who had owned the place before, and then it transferred to being America. So there are a lot of things that happen. But this guy, we got to watch out for this guy, because he wrote things that might make sense to people. We would go, if Jew weren't in there, we would go, oh, that's not fair. They didn't have scales. They couldn't tell how much they owed. And here's this person misusing them. We would probably say that as well, but we don't know the backstory. So it is true that the Jewish peddlers didn't probably make it any easier, except for that one guy who says, don't worry, I'm not going to charge you as much as everybody else. And that's where we'll close today. I'd like to take back these booklets, please. I'll hold them for next week, and we'll bring them to everybody. I will get Susie. I don't trust you. That's absolutely true. Not next week, sorry, when we come back together. I have a question. Did you enjoy these texts? Is this good for you? Okay, so please, everybody, we're going to get ready for Pesach, so have a wonderful Pesach starting next Wednesday night, and then we will be together. I'd like to thank everybody for your forbearance, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye, everybody at home.
That was a great meeting last night. And I have another idea afterwards. That is to acknowledge the high-tech and biomedical sector.
We are. Israel 21C is coming this week.
Okay, well, I didn't think that was, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, not
Israel
yet,
21C.
not yet.
They'll be doing
But I will send the
Okay.
ones
staggered
we've
with
already
each
done.
other.
Okay,
so that
I'm not
people-
familiar with
yeah.
Israel 21C.
Oh, it's all about Israel
Okay,
taxes
so I have in
and
mind.
innovation. Good
Okay,
for you.
okay,
Yeah.
there's the
So-
Technion Society is here, but we don't have to invite anyone else, so I'll take care of it.
Yeah, well, because it's short, so APAC's going to come and Israel 21C. If you would like to, be the host for those, I can introduce you to the people who are coming.
Okay.
And then you can introduce them.
Okay.
That evening.
All right.
I wrote down what else we're doing. What else are you doing? There's something else.
Was it the bake-off?
Oh, yeah, we're talking about that together.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
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 So,
Deborah already sent it to me.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. So I'm going to send out what we already did today.
I always have a comment. So, Gold Rush, one of the magazines I had this feature article on Gold Rush. Sorry. There were gold rushes in every country Yes, in you the and I world. talked about that. Yeah.
1948, from 1848 to 1900.
Yeah, you and I talked about that a little bit last week.
Oh, that's good.
When we talked about, the fact that they were staggered in time. After the gold rush in California, then people went up to Nevada to the silver lodes to do it. There were many people who traveled from rush to rush, you know.
They were all over. They were in Africa, they were in Australia, they were in New Zealand.
Right.
Name the country, they were there.
That's true.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
If you want to bring the article, we can make a copy for people. Great. If you bring it the next time we have class, then I will get it copied and we can send it out to everybody in the class. Okay. You don't have to do anything except for give it to me. Thank you. I think that they might too. You always come up with a lot of really interesting things. Do you listen to things on tape? You're a good listener here in class. A podcast or something? Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I understand. All right, well, if you remember to bring it, then we'll copy it. Call me anyone. Sure. What? Then do you use email? So you can, I can't email you because I don't know what your email address is. But if you want to, can you email me here at Adad Ariel? So can I tell you what it is? L. Alexander at AdadAriel.org. Or look it up on the Adad Ariel site.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
This was okay?
Yes, this is like I had no, I mean,
right, right.